Hello and welcome live to Tomorrow's World. On a car that looks pretty smart, we'll find out in a moment how to reveal all those invisible patches of rust.
And also in the show, Judith takes a most unusual tourist trip around the coast of Hawaii. Howard in Holland finds a farmer who milks his cows by robot. And Peter reports from South America on the rocket that's due to take the Astra broadcast satellite into orbit tomorrow. But first, let's go back to Howard.
Yeah, well, the bodywork's not bad. A few patches of rust on the door, but certainly not as important as corrosion of some of the key structural areas of the car, like the sills. The problem is spotting invisible areas of corrosion before they can become a danger. Well, here's something that could help me to find those suspicious areas. If I put the probe on here and we get a green, the display goes up green there, but watch what happens when I put it on the front of the bonnet down here. Probe there and we get a red, so we can see that there's something wrong there that wasn't on the panel up there. Well, it's a new corrosion tester that's been developed in Germany for their equivalent of the MOT test, and it's a bit more sophisticated than the old trick of just using a magnet. Well, inside this probe, a coil produces a current which changes when the probe is in contact with different metal. Now, to show you those changes, we've connected it up to an oscilloscope. So when I bring the probe close to a piece of steel, it produces a change in the oscilloscope there. And that change depends on how well the metal conducts electricity and whether it's magnetic. So if I move from steel to aluminium, a different shape is produced. And rusty steel here, well, there's another shape again. Now, those three changes show up on the machine as colours. So, green indicates pure steel. Silver, I've got a bit of mess on there. The green is for pure steel. Silver, which is for aluminium, comes up silver, and that's often used as a filler. And red for the rusty steel. So it looks as though the red signal that I got from my car must have been rust. Remember, it was down here on the front of the bonnet, so let's have a look. Yeah, and I can see it absolutely in my hand. There we are, there's a piece there, and you can see that it's running underneath all the way. Well, meanwhile, Judith's found a rather more exotic way to spend her time.
Hawaii's economy depends on that irresistible combination of sea and sun, because tourism is the main industry here. Mark Twain, a pioneer of tourism in Hawaii, summed it up. A man may sun himself all day long under the palm trees and be no more troubled by his conscience than a butterfly. And then the scientists spoilt it all by saying the sun can damage our skin and our health. But if it's unwise to stay in the sun too long, what else can a tourist in Hawaii do? You can brush up on your hula dancing and singing with the local experts, or pick up a few hints on how to make a lei, a traditional garland of flowers. Botanical gardens look fascinating, and I definitely want to do one of these helicopter tours. The choice on these contrasting islands really is amazing. But I'm a bit of a traditionalist, so I think this afternoon it's a trip round the bay.
We have certain safety equipment for your use. Then if there were any noxious fumes on board, we would ask you to take out a respirator in a little gray can like this. Take the tab, pop it, take the lid off, pull it out of the can.
Ultimate in tourist treats, an exploration of the Hawaiian underworld in this submarine designed exclusively for holidaymakers. The submarine can take its 48 passengers on a sightseeing cruise down to 50 meters, giving them a glimpse of life under the sea. Fish, like most animals, can't resist a free meal, so this fish feeding routine is now part of the package, and it's encouraging schools of fish to stay on the reef and not be frightened away by the new intruder. efficiency is maintained by controlling the amount of water and compressed air in these ballast tanks. The motors are electric and the power is from a bank of batteries. It feels very comfortable down here because it's normal atmospheric pressure and it's safe. The pilot's in constant contact with the support vessel, and because the submarine is naturally buoyant, should there be an electrical failure, it would just float up to the surface. Tourist submarines like this will soon be appearing in other holiday haunts, giving people a tantalizing taste of this underwater world. Well, that's convinced me. I really am going to learn to scuba dive.
This dummy next to me is wearing a hearing aid. And the reason I'm sounding slightly tinny is that you're listening not to my studio microphone, but to the output of this hearing aid inside the dummy's ear canal. In other words, this is roughly how my voice would sound if you were wearing one of these. And in a quiet studio, it's perfectly intelligible. But if there's any background sound, then that sound too is amplified along with my voice, making it much harder to hear what I'm saying. Unless, of course, I step in closer to the ear. And it's this distracting background noise that is the biggest problem for most people who wear a hearing aid. But this one is different. I've now just switched in a sophisticated chip inside the hearing aid, which means that it can pick out my voice even from back here and filter out the noise. It uses the fact that the background babble reaches the hearing aid as a more or less continuous noise, but my voice has a complex sound pattern which is far more varied. If I switch down that noise there, and then turn off the chip here, and also speak to you on my studio mic, you should be able to hear me a little more clearly. Over there is a spectrum analyzer that is still displaying only what is going on through this hearing aid here. At the moment, remember, with the chip switched off. Let's look first at my speech pattern on its own, and you can see that it's changing quite violently. But if I turn the background sound on again, here we go, when I next stop talking, you'll see that this pattern will become much flatter and fairly constant. But now if I add my voice, my speech pattern is almost lost in the background noise. But switch in the chip, and you can probably see that that unchanging background is now suppressed, allowing my rapidly varying voice patterns to stand out much more clearly. So what this device produces is a voice which may sound thin, but for someone with a hearing problem, it's a lot clearer than trying to listen to me above a confusing background babble.
So far, they're not freely available in this country, and this microprocessor would add about £100 to the cost. But it does represent the first of a new generation of intelligent hearing aids. Well, now Howard reports from Holland.
All over the world, at around 6 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon, it's the same scene. And so in Holland, twice a day, every day, all year round, the cows are called in for milking. But once they get inside, there have already been a few changes in recent years. In the most up-to-date milking parlours, you'll find that cows wear transponders round their necks. Now, they identify each of them electronically by name and by number, and link through to a computer which doles out automatically exactly the right amount of food to each cow. The computer also records her milk yield and alerts the farmer if any cow needs special treatment. And although the farmer still has to put the milking clusters on laboriously by hand, when the milk has run dry, they fall away automatically. So things have certainly speeded up, and one farmer, like Cote de Boer here, can milk all his 75 cows on his own. But he's still not freed from that day-in, day-out chore. Whilst the rest of us are sitting down to Christmas dinner, he's out here. And although everyone has learnt to live with that routine, it's really not natural for the cows either. If they were feeding the calf, it would be milking on demand, several times a day, not just twice. and trials have proved that milking more often, as the calf naturally would, increases the yield. Not really practical for the farmer, though. Well, at last, there's an end in sight to this mutually inconvenient regime. The ultimate in automation. A robot milker that is available on demand. This prototype is one of 2 being developed in the Netherlands. Everything will be monitored by computer, and the farmer only need come out if it signals a problem. The idea is that the cow can wander into the milking station anytime she feels like it, and can be fed and milked completely automatically. She's identified by her transponder in the usual way, and some food pellets delivered down the pipeline. Her rations will be monitored throughout the day. The food makes sure her head stays in the right place. Now the correct position of the haunches determines the rest of the process. First, the brushes wipe off the excess dirt and stimulate the milk flow. The computer already knows the udder measurements of each individual cow. This was done manually the first time, and the setting programmed into the computer's memory. So now the milking clusters can locate the udder automatically. A herd of 100 cows would only need about 4 milking stations like this. But the real advantage to automatic milking is that as milk yield goes up through milking on demand, fewer cows have to be kept to get the same amount of milk. Of course, this prototype has got to be integrated into a complete dairy farm to see if it really is practical. It would be no use, for instance, if cows refused to use it, although these seem happy enough to fall into line. When the milk flow stops, the occupant isn't encouraged to stay there. The food supply automatically cuts off and triggers the gate to open, all set for the next in the queue. Well, the manufacturers believe that fully automated milking could become commercially successful in the next couple of years. A British system may also be ready for milk trials next year, although I think it's going to take a little longer before the farmers fully trust a robot milkmaid enough so that they can stay inside and watch the telly. Meanwhile, the cows themselves, well, they seem to be perfectly at home.
With inherited diseases like cystic fibrosis or muscular dystrophy, 4 months into pregnancy is normally the earliest point at which doctors can confirm diagnosis. And as these remarkable pictures show, the fetus at that stage is already well advanced. However, it may soon be possible to identify these genetic diseases far earlier, when the embryo is only 3 days old and no bigger than a pinpoint. But this research at Hammersmith and Northwick Park hospitals uses embryos that have been fertilised in the test tube. In fact, they're spare embryos from in vitro fertilisation, and the ethics of this are still being argued. It's possible that embryo research may yet be made illegal. But this new work does demonstrate why many doctors and scientists think it important that it continues. Now, the study focuses on the embryo when it consists of just 8 cells, about 3 days after fertilisation. In the body, this is around the time the embryo travels down the fallopian tubes and into the uterus. It's known as the pre-embryo stage. And each of these 8 cells contains all the genetic information needed to create a complete individual. But what's also important is that at this point, none of these cells have decided which part of the future embryo or its placenta they'll be. The idea behind the new technique is to remove one of these cells for examination, and then, after screening its genetic material, to implant the 7-cell embryo back in the mother. The first problem is to remove the cell without damaging the rest of the embryo. Using micro-manipulators and operating under a microscope, the pre-embryo is held in place, and then, as we see here, one cell is sucked out. Inside this single cell is the individual's genetic blueprint. The trouble is finding and testing for the minute section of interest, for example, a genetic fault or the sex of the pre-embryo. So a technique called DNA amplification is used, something we showed earlier this year. With the right genetic probe, this machine can multiply a particular part of the DNA millions of times, providing enough of it to test for a specific gene by conventional methods. And since the whole procedure only takes a few hours, the embryo can still be reimplanted after the result is known. The Hammersmith Group have succeeded in detecting the sex of pre-embryos. And that means for women who are carrying sex-linked genetic diseases like haemophilia, the technique could help them at a very early stage to choose only embryos that will be unaffected by the disease. And with more accurate genetic probes, the scientists may one day be able to spot specific diseases like cystic fibrosis. So far, no one has tried to reimplant a 7-cell embryo, but work with animal pre-embryos suggests that removal of one cell at this very early stage doesn't damage the embryo later. But the only real way of knowing will be to reimplant one and to follow the pregnancy. The Hammersmith researchers hope to receive the ethical go-ahead soon for this final stage. It's over a year since the government produced a white paper suggesting a legal framework for this sort of research, but there's no sign of a parliamentary debate in the near future. In the meantime, work like this shows the enormous practical benefit that could come from embryo research.
The American space shuttle successfully returned to Earth on Tuesday after its second flight since parts of it were redesigned. The 4-day mission was shrouded in secrecy, but the crew are thought to have deployed a sophisticated spy satellite. The next mission for this orbiter, Atlantis, is scheduled for April 1989 and will be rather less clandestine. It'll carry the unmanned NASA spacecraft Magellan on the first leg of its voyage to Venus, which it should reach by this time next year. Magellan will continue the work of the Pioneer 13 orbiter, which this week celebrated its 10th birthday in orbit around Venus. Pioneer was originally intended to last just one Venusian day, that's 243 Earth days, but it's still transmitting data about the atmosphere and surface relief of Venus based on radar imaging. This has enabled NASA scientists to map the planet's mountains and valleys. The main purpose of the more sophisticated Magellan spacecraft will be to produce much higher resolution images of the planet, showing features down to 100 meters across. Researchers hope that this may help to explain the evolution of the roasting conditions on the surface of the planet.
This week you may have seen reports in the press about a drug called THA, which seems in some people partially to reverse the effects of Alzheimer's disease, a form of senile dementia that affects around 500,000 people in Britain. After taking THA for only 3 months, half the patients in a small informal trial conducted by the London Institute of Psychiatry showed a remarkable recovery, although some also suffered side effects, including serious liver damage. Meanwhile, the same team is about to publish reports from another preliminary trial which showed that low doses of nicotine have a similar beneficial effect on Alzheimer's patients. The nicotine could be taken as chewing gum. But even in this form, nicotine is known to have unpleasant side effects of its own, but they're not as unpleasant as those of THA. Nicotine also has the advantage of being relatively cheap. A further trial using nicotine is now coming to a close, and results are expected in the next few weeks.
A group of Japanese researchers made their UK recording debut today on compact disc. Yes, well, it's not a strong contender for the Christmas #1 spot. In fact, this compact disc is a demonstration copy made on the first of a new generation of CD players capable of recording as well as playback. In theory, once the new players go onto the market, you'd be able to buy a blank disc for around £5 and record other discs onto it, all in fine digital quality. Not surprisingly, the recording industry is extremely concerned, and their problems are going to get worse. You can only record on these discs once, but the next stage of development is a disc which can be erased and recorded many times. To prevent widespread piracy, the music industry is calling for a levy on blank discs, or a technical way of preventing unauthorized copying.
The latest animal health idea from America is about to be launched here at London Zoo. It's a new therapy designed to alleviate boredom in unhappy animals, and it's a ball. Called boomer balls, the new toys are very popular with the polar bears at Philadelphia Zoo, but they come in different sizes designed to suit animals from chimpanzees to elephants. American animal behavior specialists have found that the boomer balls eliminate signs of boredom and say that they can even withstand the aggression of a tiger.
And now more space news, because tomorrow Europe's first direct broadcast television satellite is due to be launched into orbit. Peter's been to visit the launch site in South America.
A jungle in French Guiana, close to the equator, is perhaps an unlikely starting point for a revolution that will be brought to the living rooms of Europe. Because in a clearing just over here is the launch site of Europe's own rocket, which will be carrying Astra, a satellite bringing us 16 new television channels. And here is the rocket that'll do it, Ariane 4, the latest in the Ariane series, bigger and more powerful than any of her predecessors.
In preparation for the blast-off, this rocket is being rolled out along a kilometre of giant track and onto the launch pad. It's the latest to reach the end of the world's first rocket production line, which will be turning them out for launching at the incredible rate of over 1 a month. In this unpredictable field, that requires a lot of confidence. But the company behind it is out to persuade us that we're quite simply looking at the best and most efficient launcher in the world.
10, 9.
Arianespace was started in 1980 with the sole purpose of offering a fully commercial space launch service.
2, 1, feu. Ignition. Allumage. Lift-off. Décollage. All boosters on.
The first demonstration flight of this new Ariane 4 took place earlier this year. The next will be only its second, and the very first to carry a fully commercial payload.
Toute pression normale. Roll maneuver en roulis. Solids to burn about 30 seconds.
Confidence is high, for with a 90% success rate across the whole Ariane series, it's now considered to be the most reliable rocket launcher.
One essential ingredient of a successful commercial rocket has been to match the varying payloads with the power that's needed to lift it off into space. And Ariane 4 is quite positively a mix and match rocket. To carry bigger payloads, you simply strap on liquid fuel boosters or solid fuel boosters, up to 4 of each or any combination. This is the payload fairing where the satellites will be carried, and that will be mounted onto the rocket when it's reached the launch pad. But this is only part of the story. Ariane also has a highly accurate digital flight navigation system, which is operated from their mission control room. But what really makes Ariane the best rocket launcher in the world is the way that it delivers its satellites into orbit. Now, all television satellites, like Astra, have to be in a geostationary orbit. And if we take a look at our globe, which is not quite to scale, I can show you that a geostationary orbit is one in which the satellite always remains in the same position above the Earth as it rotates, so that the users down below can always pick up a signal.
That orbit must be 36,000 kilometers up, and conventionally the launcher first puts the satellite into a low Earth orbit about 300 kilometers up. Then the satellite's own rocket engine kicks it into a long elliptical orbit, the geostationary transfer orbit, the farthest point being the magical 36,000 kilometers away. Finally, the satellite's engine fires again and kicks it into the circular geostationary orbit.
Now, all that is fine, except that, of course, it uses up a lot of fuel. And since the life of a satellite is governed by the amount of fuel it has on board, this can reduce the life of the satellite, which is currently about 10 years. Now, with Ariane, because it is lifting off from here in French Guiana, which is right next to the equator, and because of that very sophisticated digital flight control system, it can bypass that low Earth orbit
and deliver the satellite straight into the geostationary transfer orbit. All the satellite has to do then is fire its rocket once to put itself into the true geostationary orbit.
That means that the satellite uses much less fuel, which in the case of Astra means that it can extend its life by a further 2.5 years, and that makes sound economic sense. The whole world has been eagerly awaiting a regular and reliable satellite launching system. And if all goes well with this one, the Europeans will not only have a new satellite television station, but also a whole new industry, building and launching rockets that can deliver the ever-increasing number of satellites into orbits that no other rockets can reach.
And Astra's launch is still on target for midnight tomorrow, our time. Now, in recent months, we've heard a lot about the virus which has devastated populations of common seals in the North Sea. The good news is that it does appear to have burnt itself out. It remains to be seen, however, what happens when the next generation of pups are born in the summer. But around Britain's coast, far more common than the common seals are the grey seals, and it's still not clear how the virus may affect them. In all adults tested recently, antibodies to the virus have been found, which means some may be carrying it and could spread it. This risk has given fresh urgency to the work of biologists who want to know more about the movements of the seals around our coasts. By comparing these movements with any future outbreak of the disease, they could establish if the grey seal is implicated in spreading it. Now, researchers from Cambridge working around the Scottish coast have found a way to identify and track seals without catching or tagging them. They're using the distinctive patterns that grey seals have in their fur. And they've built up a library of pictures which could help them to trace individual seals. But identifying the individual fur patterns by eye would take forever, and in any case pictures taken at different angles and in different light conditions are very deceptive. So they've developed an automatic system which can tell you in seconds whether or not a seal has already been photographed and where and when. Each new photograph is logged into the computer's memory, and then to line it up for analysis, 3 bearings are taken around the eyes and the ear. Then it fits the 3D computer framework, precisely matching the contours of the head. And that provides all the coordinates needed for a map of the fur patterns. Next, a patch of fur is selected, and this is then flattened and smoothed out by the computer so that it can easily be compared with patterns already stored in the memory. And no matter what position the seal's in, it can still flatten out that pattern and recognise it. So let's see whether there's any other record of this seal already in the library. Now, this printout is going to give me, in order of percentage likeliness, a list of other pictures of the seals. So what we'll do is take a look at the top 2 there, which are these 2. Now, I think it's quite apparent, isn't it, that these 2 seals are the same, but the computer has also pulled out this seal, and that is indeed the same seal, just been photographed at different places around the coast. So by tracking the seals in this way, the researchers hope to see whether the grey seals are involved in spreading the virus, and if so, where to expect any future outbreaks. Amazingly, this same system can be adapted for other pattern creatures and may be of use to people with such diverse interests as hyenas and mackerel. And with that thought, that's all from us tonight. So until next week at the same time, good night.